What's going on, friends and fam? This is Princeton Brown from Sonic Gold Productions, here to turn your music into Sonic Gold.
Sonic Gold Productions.
Today, I want to go over a very important topic. I want to go over a very important topic today in the sector of mixing. And we all struggle with getting more separation in our mixes. You know, making our hi-hats and our snares and our kicks and our vocals, everything placed exactly where it should be in the mix, and just getting that exact separation that we need so that we can hear everything in our headphones, on speakers. Like, how do we get such separation in a mix to distinguish everything and make sure that everything is clearly heard, clearly felt. Today I want to cover those topics, exactly like some of my techniques of how I go about getting more separation. It's actually a lot more psychological than you would think, than actual fundamentals, but we'll get into that. Before we do, I'd like to introduce to you guys my brand new mini course that I have available online. If you're someone who struggles with mixing and mastering, I created this super cool mini course with about 6 or 7 videos. It's called 6 Mix Finalizers. And you know, a lot of the times we get to the end of our mix and we're just like, yo, am I done? I'm not sure. You know, we'll bounce the mix, we'll listen to it in a bunch of places, and it seems like we can just do revisions after revisions after revisions and never really be done. This course I designed to show you 6 different techniques of things to do right before you finish your mix, so that 90% of the time you're more likely going to be finished because of these 6 techniques that you did. So I want you guys to be confident with the final mixes that you complete and feel that you are confident with. I want you guys to feel this confidence, and these techniques I'm going to show you is going to allow you to feel that confidence with your mixes. So check it out. Link is in the description below. 6 Mix Finalizers. Check out that mini course. You won't be dissatisfied. But without further ado, let's dive into the topic today. So if we're talking about how to get more separation in the mix, I created some notes here and I want to go over. So the first note that I have here is make sure you do a good static mix. So a static mix, a lot of people don't know what a static mix is, or they just don't do it. A static mix is even before you put any plugins on your mix, before EQ, compression, reverbs, anything. I'm talking about completely dry, just using the faders of your mix and getting healthy volumes for everything, finding the pockets of space where every sound should kind of be, without removing frequencies, without doing any alteration, any plugins. You're just trying to find the pockets and areas in your mix of where the sound should be. And this is kind of like the foundation of your mix. If you don't do a good static mix, it's pretty hard to get a really great mix at the end of the day. But if you do a good static mix where your drums are at good ranges, usually for majority of radio music, which we're talking pop, hip-hop, trap, R&B, you name it, usually the drums are going to be quite loud, right? We want the drums hitting hard, so usually your drums are going to be loud. Your kick, snare, hi-hat pretty much at the same levels in terms of you perceive the loudness of it at the same level, so you want those up here. Then below that, you have your music tracks. Sometimes you have your vocals sitting slightly above the music track, so you have your drums, vocals, like your lead vocal, right? And then you'll have your music tracks sitting below the vocals. Your music tracks are your keyboards, your synths, your guitars, everything that constitutes, the chords and the progression and the music of the song. And then you'll have your bass, your 808 or your electric bass. Usually those actually sit pretty high. So those will be up more towards, maybe slightly under the kick drum. So slightly under where the drums are. So as you can see there, the lowest volumes in your mix generally for most genres, especially for people who follow the type of music I do, is your music tracks. Your music tracks should be kind of just tucked under, they shouldn't be super loud. If your music tracks, your guitars, pianos, all that stuff is super loud, your vocal has no space in between the drums and the music track. It has no space to play with. If the space is like this, there's little to no space. So make sure you guys do a very solid static mix and just get healthy volumes for everything. You know, I spend at least sometimes 30 minutes, you know, but usually right around maybe like 15 minutes or so, but sometimes 30 minutes just sitting there listening to the mix and just trying to like feel out the faders and just understand exactly where things should be placed without doing any plugins. It's a very, very important skill to have. A lot of people miss that. The second point that I put on here is filter out high end. So you want to achieve depth in, you know, to get more separation in your mix, you want to achieve more depth in your mix. And one way to achieve more depth in your mix is to filter out high end. So for example, oftentimes the instruments that are louder, we don't want to filter out high end, because high end, high information, high frequencies is perceived as being closer to you. I wish I could demonstrate this right now. I can't really, but you know, if I talk closer to this mic here, if I talk really close to it, I don't know if that did it, but the high end is going to be perceived a little bit, you know, it's going to be perceived higher. You're going to hear me a little bit more clear. If someone's whispering or talking right in your ear, you're going to hear, you know, all of that, like, you know, all of that just high end detail, as opposed to if they're like talking to you way further away, right? And so a way that we can create more separation in our mixes is all the music tracks that we have, the pianos, the keys, the synths, everything that makes up that music tracks that are kind of buried in the back of our mix, kind of lower. A lot of those instruments we can actually filter out the high end. So we'll use a low pass frequency, low pass filter, right, on any basic EQ, parametric EQ, and just take out that high end. Usually, you know, the most you'd want to take out is, I would say the most you would ever pretty much want to take out is somewhere around the 2 kilohertz range. Generally I do that a lot for like live bass. I don't need a lot of like the high end of the strings with the live bass sometimes. But like, you know, generally I would say a comfortable range is anywhere around 4 to 5K. 4 to 5 kilohertz, you take out the high end up to that point, you're getting a really nice dimension to your mix already right there. All right. The third point that I have on here is actually boosting high end in tracks. So like I just said, for things, for instruments, sounds to be perceived as closer to you, you want to boost the high end on those instruments as well, if they contain high end information. For example, your kick may be super loud, right, but it may not contain high information, so there's no need to really boost high end there. But like for your hi-hats, snares, percussions, vocals, things like that, you boost this high end and it's going to be perceived as much closer than if that high end was not boosted, sorry. So pay special attention to that. Make sure that you don't over boost the high end though, because you don't want obviously your mixes to sound thin, but just adding a little bit of a shelf, you know, is a really great trick. So sometimes, for example, I have my drums grouped and I'll send them to a drum bus, and on that channel, on that auxiliary channel, which is my drum bus, I'll just have an EQ up there and I'll just shelf, you know, maybe 5 kilohertz and up, I'll just shelf that a little bit, and that will give me more presence with my drums. My drums will just pop out a little bit more in the mix. Again, these are all things that you do after the static mix, so make sure you do the static mix properly. But these are just some tips for you guys. The fourth thing that I have here is to use saturation plugins. All right, so why use saturation plugins? So if you're trying to achieve more clarity, more dimension in your mix, hear different sounds more equally, saturation can help because it gives every sound a different timbre, if you will, if you've heard of that term. It gives every sound a different color. A lot of people talk about mixing as painting sometimes, and like using certain plugins as like strokes of a brush. You know, if you want a bigger brush, smaller brush, giving things kind of like a different texture. So Saturation plugins, there's tons of saturation plugins. You got tape saturation and tube saturation. Those are the two primary saturation types, but within those you got a lot of different forms of saturation that you can use and different colors and textures you can play with. And just simply popping on, you know, whatever tube emulation or tape emulation plugin and just, you know, increasing the gain on that plugin and adding a little bit of that texture to a sound is great. You know, one of the tricks that I love doing is if there's a particular sound that is not cutting through in the mix, but I don't necessarily want it to be louder, I just want it to cut through, sometimes I'll actually go for the lo-fi plugin in Pro Tools, just the default lo-fi plugin, and I'll use the distortion knob on that plugin and just bring the distortion knob up slightly. Try that and you'll notice that whatever, you know, instrument sound that you put that on, that thing is going to pop out in the mix like instantly. And that's because there's more harmonics, there's more frequencies generated from that one instrument. It's popping out more. So that's what saturation can do for you. Be careful with saturation as always. You know, you don't want to overdo it, but generally it's kind of one of those things where you just kind of use your ears and just mix that into taste. But putting saturation on different elements, and the key is using different types of saturations. You don't want to use the same saturation setting on every single element, because then everything sounds the same. So you want different type of saturations, maybe a tape saturation on your bass guitar, maybe some tubes on your vocals, maybe a different tube setting on a guitar, etc. You want to switch it up. The fifth point that I have here is you want to give more reverb to certain things, certain elements. So you want to create more space, right? We're always talking about dimension, space. You want to create space. So one tool or one major lesson that I learned in mixing with reverb and when you're trying to create more dimension in your mix is to not use the same reverb for everything. If you use the same reverb for everything, everything is going through the same reverb, everything has the same sound, everything becomes a little bit more muddy. That's how you get more muddy mixes. If your mixes are muddy and just kind of sloppy, you may be mixing too much reverb or like using the same reverb on too many sounds. What I like to do is give every sound its own space. So sometimes, you know, if I have a string section, I need them like in a big like studio room. If I have a vocal, you know, depending on the style and the track, maybe I want the vocal super intimate, I'll put it in a very small, tight studio room just to give it a little ambiance, but it feels like the vocal is very close. Maybe I want to feel more depth in the mix, so I'll use like a large plate reverb, which I use a lot on like a snare drum or a vocal, and that's going to give me some depth in the mix instantly. Another trick is if you want more depth in the mix, just add a large reverb to your snare drum or like the claps. Anything that's doing the 2 and the 4. Anything that's doing that two hitting on beats 2 and 4, the snare drum, the claps, or the rim shot or the cross stick, anything like that, just add some reverb to that, because naturally our ears are designed to hear the tail of that instrument because it's so loud, so percussive, so transient, especially when you're listening to just live music in general. You can always hear kind of the tail of like the snare drum and how, you know, if there's like a drum set in a big concert hall, you can definitely hear when that drummer is hitting that snare drum and feeling how far back the space is. So if you're lacking dimension in your mix, definitely just add a little bit of reverb on your snare drum. Not too much, because you don't want to, you know, make your reverb or make your snare drum not punchy. You know, you want your snare drum to be punchy, but just enough, you know, to hear how far down, how far deep your mix actually goes. That allows other things to be perceived as even being closer to you. So that's another trick in mixing. All right, my sixth and final way that you guys can achieve more separation in your mixes is to have fewer tracks. Now I know this is hard for a lot of people. A lot of people like to produce with so many tracks. They think that they need every single part that they play in a song, and they feel all these different parts. But in my 10 plus years of experience in mixing, the songs that I've worked on that have the greatest sense of depth and clarity are the songs that have the fewest tracks. They don't have many tracks. The more tracks that you have, if you really just think about it, the more tracks that you have, the more space that you're taking up in your mix that you could allow. And it's nice, it's pleasant, and it's great to be able to hear space in the mix. You know, sometimes we want to hear just that open space in the mix because it allows us to walk into the mix and just kind of feel how this mix is making us feel. But if you have so many different guitars and pianos and synths and all these things going on at the same time, it just clutters that space, and then it starts to just kind of feel just like noise at that point and just sound. You get, you know, lost. You're not really sure spatially where things are. So I would take a hard look at your songs and just identify the key things. Like, if you remove this synth here, is your song going to die? And if the answer is no, try taking it out, because in the listener's ear to others, a lot of people may find that a lot more pleasing, that now there's more space in the mix, there's less distraction. They can focus on the elements in your song that are more important and that they gravitate to more. So oftentimes you can do a lot for your songs just by identifying how you can get rid of things instead of putting things in. I would say a lot of times we overproduce easily, especially nowadays. We have access to everything, right, with these computers. And if you can figure out things to pull out, I think people will gravitate more towards the things that are most important, such as, you know, the vocal. Basically, always the vocals, you know, the star. So I hope some of those tips helped you. This video is all about sharing just different ways of how you can go about achieving more separation in your mixes. Like I said, I felt like this was just a talking video because it's more psychological, you know, it's more mental. It's not so much like techniques, you know, it's just certain practices, certain things that if you put in place, you're really going to start seeing results instantly. So I highly advise you guys to just try that out today, right now. Just try out what I'm telling you about. Don't go to the next YouTube video. You know, that's not how you're gonna learn. Just pause it right here, stop it right here, and just go test out these skills and try it out, because that's where you're really gonna learn. You know, you don't want to get caught in the rabbit wheel of just watching YouTube videos thinking that you're learning, but you're really not, because you're not taking action. So take action, you guys. I hope you guys found that information helpful. Again, if you struggle with mixing, especially finalizing your mixes like so many of us do, check out my free mini course on my website. It's called 6 Mix Finalizers, and I'm going to teach you 6 different ways that you can enhance your mixes and be confident in that final mix, and you're going to definitely complete your mix and not have gazillions of revisions. So with these 6 techniques, you're going to be good to go. Check it out. Link is in the description. Otherwise, it's always a pleasure like making these videos and sharing content with you. Please let me know what you would like me to cover next, and leave a comment below. I appreciate you guys so much. My name is Princeton Brown, again, for those who don't know. Sonic Gold Productions, here to make your music turn into sonic gold. I'll see you again soon. Peace.